My name is Martha Vance, and 30 seconds ago I was a devoted wife of 42 years. Now I am a woman, holding a steak knife, staring at the back of my husband's head, while he presses his lips against a woman who wasn't even born when we bought our first home. The candlelight from their table glints off the gold band on his finger, the same band I polished for him every Sunday morning. My heart isn't breaking. It's shattering into jagged glass, and I can feel the heat of 1,000 suns rising in my chest. I pushed my chair back, the screech of wood against the marble floor, sounding like a predator's cry. I was ready to tear the world down. But then a hand as steady as an oak branch clamped onto my forearm. A voice low and gravelly, like a country road, whispered in my ear, "Stay calm, Martha. If you strike now, you lose. Stay seated. The true show is about to begin." The evening had started with such practiced suburban normalcy. It was Valentine's Day in Oak Creek, Virginia, a town where everyone knows your business, but pretends they don't. I had spent the afternoon at the salon, getting my hair set in the soft waves, Harold likes, wearing a silk dress, the color of a fine Merlot. We had reservations at the Blue Velvet, the kind of place that still uses linen napkins and plays Sinatra at a volume that allows for a real conversation. Harold had called me at 4 o'clock, his voice sounding thin and strained through the car's Bluetooth. "Sweetheart," he'd said, "the merger paperwork is a nightmare. I'm stuck at the office. I might be here until midnight. Go ahead to the restaurant with Eleanor. Don't let our table go to waste. I'll make it up to you this weekend, I promise." Eleanor, my best friend since the Nixon administration, had a migraine and backed out at the last minute. I should have seen the cracks then. I should have known that 2 coincidences in one afternoon make a conspiracy. But I'm a woman of my generation. I believed in the sanctity of a man's word, so I went alone. I figured I'd have a glass of Chardonnay, enjoy the live pianist, and toast to the 42 years we'd spent building a life from nothing. I was halfway through my salad when the hostess led a couple to a secluded booth near the terrace, just 2 tables away from mine. The man was wearing a charcoal suit I recognized instantly. I'd picked it out for him at Brooks Brothers last October. He was laughing a deep belly laugh I hadn't heard at home in years. And then came the text. My phone buzzed on the white tablecloth, stuck at work. "Happy Valentine's. Love you, H." I looked up from the glowing screen to see H leaning across the table. He wasn't reaching for a file or a pen. He was reaching for the hand of a woman in a tight sequined dress. She looked like a high-end whiskey-expensive gold and likely to leave you with a headache. When he kissed her, it wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was the kiss of a man who had forgotten he had a soul to lose. The betrayal felt physical, a cold wind blowing through the center of my rib cage. Every memory of our life, the birth of our son, the lean years in the 80s when we shared a single car, the quiet mornings on the porch, it all felt like a film strip being fed into a shredder. I felt my hand wrap around the handle of my knife. I wanted to scream. I wanted to humiliate him in front of the town's elite. I wanted to see the blood drain from his face when he realized he'd been caught. That was when Arthur appeared. Arthur Miller had owned the Blue Velvet for 30 years before retiring to a small table in the back where he watched the world go by. He was a fixture of Oak Creek, a man who knew who was paying their bills and who was paying for their sins. His grip on my arm was firm, not aggressive, but grounding. "Arthur, let go," I hissed, my voice trembling with a lethal edge. "He's right there. He lied to me. He's throwing it all away." "I know what he's doing," Martha Arthur whispered, leaning closer so no one else could hear. And I know what he's been doing for the last 6 months. If you go over there now, you're just the crazy, jealous wife. He'll spin it. He'll call it a misunderstanding. He'll gaslight you until you doubt your own eyes. You've spent 40 years building a reputation of grace. Don't trade it for 5 minutes of shouting. I looked at Arthur. His eyes were tired, but sharp, filled with the wisdom of a man who had seen 1,000 marriages crumble under these very rafters. What do you mean you know what he's been doing? I asked, my voice dropping an octave. Harold Vance is a prominent man in this town, but he's been careless, Arthur said. He thinks because I'm retired I've stopped looking, but I see the credit cards he uses for the business dinners. I see who he leaves with through the back alley. And Martha, it's worse than just another woman. Much worse. I felt a new kind of chill. The anger was still there simmering, but curiosity began to wrap around it. I looked back at Harold. He was feeding the woman a strawberry, his eyes crinkled in that predatory way he gets when he's closing a deal. He looked so confident, so safe. He had no idea that his wife was 10 feet away, being held back by a man who held the keys to the city's skeletons. Sit back down, Martha Arthur commanded softly. Finish your wine, pay your bill, act like the lady everyone knows you are. Then follow me to my office. There are ledgers in this building that don't involve the price of steak and lobster. There's a show coming, and if you play your cards right, you'll be the one taking the final bow while he's left in the dark. I took a deep breath, forcing the oxygen into my lungs until my hands stopped shaking. I looked at the knife in my hand and slowly, deliberately set it back down on the silk napkin. I took a sip of my Chardonnay. It tasted like ash, but I swallowed it anyway. I looked at Harold one last time, not with the eyes of a hurting wife, but with the cold, calculating gaze of a partner who had just realized she was being embezzled. Fine, Arthur, I said, my voice steadying. Let's see the ledger. Arthur's office was tucked behind a heavy mahogany door near the kitchen, a windowless sanctuary that smelled of old cigar smoke, leather-bound books, and the sharp tang of floor wax. It was a room that felt frozen in 1978, much like the values I thought I had been living by. Arthur didn't sit behind his desk. Instead, he pulled a chair out for me and went to a small, unassuming floor safe in the corner. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, because he'd helped dig the holes. You've known Harold as long as I have. Martha Arthur set his back to me as he spun the silver dial. He's always been a man of appetites. When you were young, it was the appetite for success. Then it was the house on the hill, then the country club membership. But men like Harold, they reach a certain age and realize they can't buy back time. So they try to buy the illusion of it. He pulled out a thick black accordion file and laid it on the desk between us. My hands were still cold, the adrenaline from the dining room floor settling into a dull, throbbing ache in my temples. I looked at the file like it was a coiled snake. What is this, Arthur? You said it was more than just her. I couldn't bring myself to say the word mistress. It felt too tawdry, too small for the weight of 42 years. Her name is Tiffany Vance Arthur said, emphasizing the last name with a grimace. No relation, of course. Not yet. She's the daughter of Gerald Miller. No relation to me, thank God, who happens to be Harold's silent partner in that new commercial development project near the interstate. You know the one? I nodded. Harold had talked of nothing else for 18 months. The Oak Creek Commons. It was supposed to be our legacy, the project that would allow us to retire to the coast and never worry about a dividend check again. I'd signed dozens of documents at the kitchen table, barely looking at them, while I poured his coffee. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. And in this room, under the hum of the fluorescent light, it felt like a catastrophic one. Arthur began spreading papers across the desk. They weren't just restaurant receipts. There were photocopies of bank transfers, wire confirmations, and legal filings from the county recorder's office. Harold isn't just having an affair, Martha. He's being bled dry, and he's doing it willingly. Arthur explained, his finger tracing a line on a ledger. Gerald Miller's company was insolvent 2 years ago. This development project, it's a shell. Harold has been funneling money, your money, the joint retirement accounts, the equity from your home, into Miller's holdings to keep Tiffany and Diamonds and her father out of bankruptcy court. He's not building a legacy. He's funding a getaway car for a girl who's going to leave him the second the accounts hit zero. I looked at a transfer from our Vanguard account. $60,000. Then another for $45,000. The dates matched the weeks I was visiting our grandchildren in Richmond. While I was reading bedtime stories, my husband was erasing our future. I felt a strange, detached sensation, as if I were watching a house burn down from a long distance away. The woman I had been an hour ago would have cried. This version of Martha, the one sitting in a windowless office with a retired gatekeeper, felt a steel rod forming in her spine. He thinks I'm a fool, I whispered. It wasn't a question. He thinks you're a lady, Arthur corrected. He thinks you'll see the truth fall apart, hire a lawyer who'll take 2 years to settle, and by then he'll have moved the rest of the assets offshore. He's counting on your dignity to keep you quiet until he's gone. I looked up at Arthur. And why are you showing me this? You've been his friend for a long time. Arthur leaned back, the old leather chair, groaning under his weight. I've been a witness to this town for half a century, Martha. I've seen good women get discarded like yesterday's news because a man got a bug in his ear about starting over. I like Harold, but I love justice. And frankly, I'm tired of seeing the wrong people win. You helped him build that firm. You worked the books in that drafty garage in the 80s while he was out shaking hands. This isn't just his money, it's yours. He handed me a small silver USB drive. Everything is on here. The dinner receipts where he claimed he was meeting with the zoning board, but was actually ordering the $500 crystal for her. The bank stubs. The photos my security guy took in the parking lot. It's all there. I took the drive. It was cold and heavy in my palm. I thought about the text message sitting on my phone, stuck at work. The lie was so effortless for him. It was a habit like breathing. What do I do now? I asked. You go home, Arthur said. You don't say a word. You don't change the locks. You don't scream, you don't pack a bag. You act like the Martha Vance he expects to see. Let him think he's the smartest man in the room for just a few days longer. He has that big Man of the Year gala on Saturday, doesn't he? I nodded slowly. The Oak Creek Historical Society Gala. The entire town would be there. It was Harold's crowning moment, his chance to stand on a stage and talk about community, family, and the future of our town. The true show, Martha Arthur said with a thin, sharp smile. It needs an audience. And on Saturday, he's giving you the biggest one in the county. Don't waste your breath on a private argument when you can have a public reckoning. I stood up, smoothing my Merlot-colored dress. I felt different. The air in the hallway seemed clearer as I walked back toward the exit, bypassing the dining room entirely. I didn't want to see him again tonight. I didn't need to. I had the ledger. I had the truth. And for the first time in 40 years, I had a secret of my own. As I stepped out into the cool Virginia night, the valet brought my car around. I tipped him, sat in the driver's seat, and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw the pearls. I saw the soft waves. But behind the eyes of the suburban grandmother, I saw a woman who was about to dismantle a kingdom. The drive home was the longest 5 miles of my life. I kept my hands at 10, and 2, my eyes fixed on the asphalt of Route 12, while my mind replayed 40 years of domestic history, like a black and white film projected on a cracked screen. I pulled into our circular gravel driveway, the headlights sweeping over the manicured boxwoods and the white columns of the colonial house we'd bought when our son Leo started kindergarten. It looked like the quintessential American dream, but tonight it felt like a stage set hollow, painted plywood held up by sand. I went inside, hung my coat in the hall closet next to his heavy wool overcoat, and walked into the kitchen. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. Instead, I sat at the breakfast nook in the dark, watching the digital clock on the microwave blink. 10:45 p.m., 11:15 p.m. At midnight, the garage door rumbled. I heard his heavy footsteps in the mudroom. I heard the jingle of his keys, the sound that usually brought a smile to my face, because it meant my partner was home safe. Tonight it sounded like the rattling of a jailer's ring. "Martha, you still up, honey?" Harold called out, his voice pitched in that faux, weary tone he used when he wanted sympathy for his hard work. He stepped into the kitchen and flicked on the light. He blinked, surprised to see me sitting there in my dinner dress, a cold cup of tea in front of me. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry about tonight," he said, walking over to kiss my forehead. I didn't flinch, though. Every nerve ending in my body screamed to recoil. He smelled of peppermint to hide the wine and a faint floral musk that definitely didn't come from my vanity. That Miller deal is just a bear. I've been staring at spreadsheets until my eyes crossed. How was your dinner? Did Eleanor's headache get any better? She stayed home, Harold. I said, my voice as flat as a prairie. I ate alone. I feel terrible. Truly, he said, loosening his tie. He looked older in the harsh kitchen light, grayer, softer around the middle. For a second, a flicker of pity brushed against my heart. This was the man who held my hand through my mother's funeral. This was the man who taught our son to throw a baseball. But then I remembered the photo in Arthur's file. Harold laughing in a parking lot, his hand on Tiffany's waist, looking at her like she was the sun and the moon. The pity died an instant death. "It's fine, Harold." I lied the words tasting like copper. "Go to bed. You have a big day tomorrow. The Historical Society is expecting your final speech draft for the gala. You're an angel, Martha." "I don't know what I'd do without you," he whispered. He patted my hand, the same hand that had been reaching for a steak knife 2 hours earlier, and headed upstairs. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I made a full Southern breakfast. Bacon eggs over easy grits and buttered toast. I moved through the kitchen like a ghost in a familiar haunting. When Harold came down smelling of expensive soap and confidence, he beamed at the spread. "We'll look at this celebrating Valentine's a day late." He chuckled, sliding into his chair. "Something like that," I said, setting his plate down. I placed my smartphone on the counter, hidden behind the fruit bowl, and hit record. "So tell me more about the Oak Creek Commons," I said, leaning against the counter. "Is it really going to be as big as you say? I was thinking about our retirement accounts. Maybe we should be more conservative now that we're pushing 70. Harold waved a piece of bacon dismissively. "Nonsense, Martha. This is the big one. We're going to triple our net worth in 18 months. Gerald Miller is a genius. His daughter, Tiffany, she's the lead consultant, has some ideas for the retail space that are going to revolutionize the county. It's a sure thing. Trust me. And the money we moved last month, I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. The Vanguard account. I noticed it was lower. He didn't even skip a beat. He looked me straight in the eye, the same blue eyes that had looked at me at the altar, and smiled. Just a bridge loan for the construction phase, honey. It'll be back in there with 20% interest by Christmas. I'm doing this for us, for our grandkids' college funds. You just worry about your garden club and that beautiful dress for Saturday. Leave the heavy lifting to me. I watched him eat. I watched the man I loved tell a lie so monstrous it threatened to swallow the room. He wasn't just stealing our money. He was stealing our history, rewriting our 40 years as a prologue to his new life with a younger woman. After he left for the office, I didn't cry. I went to the guest room and pulled out my old laptop. I plugged in Arthur's USB drive. The images were sharp, the bank statements undeniable. But the most damning thing was the audio file I had just recorded on my phone. His own voice promising me security while he was actively dismantling it. I spent the afternoon on the phone. Not with a divorce lawyer, not yet. I called a nephew of mine who worked in digital media in New York. I called the gala's event coordinator, a woman named Sarah, who had been my bridge partner for a decade. And finally, I called Arthur. I have the recording, I told him. Good, Arthur said. The gala committee asked for the Vance family tribute video by tomorrow afternoon. They want to play it right before Harold's keynote speech. Do you have the old photos? I have the photos, I said, looking at a picture on the mantle of Harold and me on our wedding day. We looked so young, so certain. And I have a few new ones to add to the montage. I want everyone to see the true Harold he's been hiding. Are you sure about this, Martha? Once that screen goes up, there's no coming back. The whole town will be watching. I looked out the window at the sprawling lawn Harold was so proud of. It was a beautiful view, but I realized I was tired of looking at things that weren't real. Let them watch Arthur. I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's. It's time for the true show to begin. The Saturday of the Oak Creek Historical Society Gala arrived with a biting silver frost that clung to the windows of our bedroom. Harold was a whirlwind of nervous energy, whistling as he shined his shoes and practiced his opening remarks in the mirror. He looked at himself with an adoration I had once shared, but today, watching him adjust his silk bow tie, I only saw a stranger wearing my husband's skin. He turned to me beaming and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. You look breathtaking, Martha. Tonight is the beginning of everything for us. I smiled, though my heart felt like a stone in a deep well. You have no idea, Harold. The ballroom of the Grand Oak Hotel was draped in gold and white, filled with the scent of expensive lilies and the low hum of 500 of the county's most influential citizens. Everyone who was anyone was there: the mayor, the bank presidents, the old families who had owned the land since the Revolutionary War. Harold moved through the crowd like a king, shaking hands and accepting early congratulations on his Man of the Year nomination. I stayed by his side, a silent, elegant shadow in my Merlot dress, clutching my evening bag, which held the small remote Arthur had slipped me in the lobby. At 8 p.m., the lights dimmed. Sarah, the event coordinator, took the stage. Before we hear from our keynote speaker, Harold Vance, we have a special surprise. Martha has put together a tribute to the 40 years of leadership and family values that Harold has brought to our community. Please look at the screens. Harold squeezed my hand, leaning in to whisper, "You shouldn't have, sweetheart." I didn't look at him, I looked at the giant projection screen as the music began a soft orchestral version of Our House. The show started exactly as he expected. There were grain black and white photos of us as newlyweds in front of our first fixer-upper. There were shots of Harold coaching Little League, Harold receiving his first civic award, and a beautiful portrait of our family last Thanksgiving. The audience awed in unison. Harold was glowing, his chest puffed out with pride. Then the music shifted. The sweet violins were replaced by a low, rhythmic bass line that felt like a heartbeat. The screen flickered. A photo appeared that wasn't in the official archives. It was a grainy, high-resolution shot of Harold's car at the Paradise Motel, dated 3 weeks ago. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop on the velvet carpet. The next slide was a split screen. On the left, a bank statement showing a $100,000 withdrawal from our family trust. On the right, a photo of Tiffany Vance wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet captioned with a screenshot of her social media post. "Thanks, H. Best Valentines ever." Harold's hand went cold in mine. He tried to pull away, but I gripped him with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Stay calm, Harold," I whispered, mimicking Arthur's voice from the restaurant. "The true show is just beginning." The final blow was the audio. My kitchen recording played through the high-fidelity speakers of the ballroom. Harold's voice, booming and confident, filled the hall. "I'm doing this for us, for our grandkids. Trust me." It played over a scrolling list of every debt he had accrued in the name of the Miller family, followed by a photo of him and Tiffany kissing at the Blue Velvet just 4 nights prior. The screen went white, and 3 simple words appeared in bold black letters. "Freedom is gifted." I let go of his hand. Harold looked like a man who had been struck by lightning while standing in a swimming pool. His face was a ghastly shade of gray, his mouth hanging open as he looked around the room. 500 pairs of eyes, eyes of the people he had spent a lifetime trying to impress, were staring at him with a mixture of horror and disgust. Gerald Miller, sitting at the front table, turned his chair away, already distancing himself from the sinking ship. I walked toward the stage, the clicking of my heels, the only sound in the vacuum of the ballroom. I didn't take the microphone to scream. I didn't need to. I simply stood at the podium, looked directly at my husband, and spoke into the silence. "Harold, you told me you were building a legacy." I said, my voice carrying to the very back of the hall without a tremor. "But a legacy built on lies is just a ruin waiting to happen. I am gifting you the freedom you so clearly craved. As of tomorrow morning, our joint accounts are frozen for audit, and I've filed for a legal separation. You can keep the Oak Creek Commons and the debts that come with it. I'll keep my dignity." I turned and walked off the stage. I didn't look back to see him crumble. I didn't need to see the social suicide of the man I had loved for 4 decades. As I reached the exit, Arthur was standing by the heavy oak doors, holding my coat. He didn't say a word. He just gave me a solemn nod and opened the door to the cool, honest night air. Behind me, the ballroom erupted into a cacophony of whispers and gasps. But for me, the noise was already fading into the distance. The true show had reached its finale, and for the first time in a year, I could finally breathe. The silence of the parking lot was a stark contrast to the buzzing hornet's nest I had left behind in the ballroom. As the valet brought my car around, I caught a glimpse of Harold through the glass doors. He looked small, shrunken like a balloon that had finally lost its air. He was surrounded by a wall of cold shoulders. Even the men who had golfed with him for 20 years were looking at their shoes. The man of the year was now the man of the hour, and not in the way he had practiced in our bedroom mirror. I drove away from the hotel, but I didn't head toward the colonial house with the white columns. I couldn't go back there yet. That house was filled with the ghosts of a marriage that had been a lie for longer than I cared to admit. Instead, I drove 3 hours west toward the Blue Ridge Mountains, to a place Harold had likely forgotten we even owned. It was a small cedar-shingled cabin on the edge of Lake Anna, bought with a small inheritance from my grandmother back in the 70s. We hadn't been there in a decade. Harold always said it was too rustic for a man of his standing. The cabin was freezing when I arrived, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. I built a fire in the stone hearth, my movements slow and deliberate. For the first time in 42 years, no one knew where I was. No one was asking me what was for dinner. No one was lying to me about where they'd been. The quiet was heavy, but it wasn't lonely. It was honest. 2 days later, the gravel crunched outside. I didn't have to look to know it was his car. He didn't have the key. I'd changed the deadbolt the morning after the gala, so he knocked a hesitant, rhythmic sound that lacked his usual bravado. When I opened the door, Harold looked like he'd aged 10 years in 48 hours. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and the arrogance that usually sat on his shoulders like a cape had been replaced by a crushing weight of shame. "Martha," he croaked, his voice breaking. "Please, just let me speak." I stepped back, allowing him into the small kitchen. I didn't offer him coffee. I didn't offer him a seat. I just leaned against the counter and waited. "It's over," he said, staring at his hands. "The Millers." Gerald pulled out of the Commons project the night of the gala. He said the PR nightmare was too much. "Tiffany? She's gone, Martha." She took the car I bought her and headed for Florida the next morning. She wouldn't even take my calls. I've lost the firm. I've lost the development. The bank is calling in the loans on the house. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears. I'm a fool. I see that now. I let a midlife crisis destroy a lifetime of work. I let a girl who didn't know my middle name throw away the woman who knew my soul. I'm not here to ask for the money back, Martha. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. I have nothing left. I looked at him, and for the first time since that night at the Blue Velvet, the rage didn't flare up. Instead, I felt a profound sense of exhaustion. I looked at the man I had built a life with, and I realized that while I had won the show, I had still lost my partner. The revenge had been a necessary surgery, but the wound was still deep. You have yourself, Harold, I said quietly. That's what you were so afraid of facing, wasn't it? That's why you needed the young girl and the big projects, to avoid looking at the man in the mirror. You didn't just lose the house and the firm. You lost the truth. I know, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I'd give anything to go back to that morning at the kitchen table and tell you the truth. But you didn't, I reminded him. You chose the lie, and now you have to live with the consequences of that choice. He sat down at the small wooden table, burying his face in his hands. He wept then, not the performative weeping of a man trying to get his way, but the ragged, ugly sobs of someone who has finally realized the magnitude of his own destruction. I didn't go to him. I didn't put my hand on his shoulder. We were past the point of easy comfort. But I didn't kick him out into the cold either. The guest room is made up, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Stay the night. We have papers to sign in the morning, and you need your rest. But don't mistake this for a homecoming, Harold. The house on the hill is gone. We're just two people in a cabin now, trying to figure out what's left when the fire goes out. He nodded, unable to speak. As he walked toward the guest room, I realized that the true show wasn't the public humiliation at the gala. It was this. The quiet, painful aftermath where the masks are gone and all that remains is the wreckage. I sat back down by the fire, listening to the wind howl across the lake. I wasn't happy, but for the first time in a very long time, I was at peace. The following morning, the mountain air was crisp and unforgiving, much like the reality that sat between us at the small pine table. Harold was nursing a mug of black coffee, his hands no longer shaking, but his eyes remained hollow. The sun crested over Lake Anna, casting long golden fingers across the floorboards of the cabin he had once dismissed as beneath him. Now it was the only roof he had left that wasn't being foreclosed upon. We didn't speak of Tiffany or the gala or the whispers that I knew were still echoing through the halls of the country club back home. Instead, we spoke of the logistics of a life dismantled. I had brought the paperwork, the separation agreement, the inventory of our remaining assets, and the contact information for the forensic accountant Arthur had recommended. "I'm not going to leave you in the street, Harold," I said, my voice steady. "But the days of me subsidizing your delusions are over. You'll have enough for a modest apartment and a car that isn't a status symbol. The rest is mine. Not out of spite, but because I'm the one who's going to have to manage the fallout for our family. I don't deserve even that." He whispered, his gaze fixed on a knot in the wood of the table. "I destroyed our son's inheritance, Martha. How am I supposed to look Leo in the eye?" "You start by telling him the truth," I replied. "Not a version of it that makes you look like a victim of bad timing or market shifts. You tell him you were selfish. You tell him your mother was right to protect herself. That's the only way you'll ever get his respect back. It's the only way you'll ever get your respect back." For the first time in the decades I'd known him, Harold didn't try to spin the narrative. He didn't look for a loophole or a scapegoat. He simply nodded a slow, painful movement. In that silence, something shifted. The revenge I had sought, the public shaming and the financial ruin felt like a heavy coat I was finally ready to take off. I realized that keeping him in a state of perpetual punishment would only keep me tied to the version of him I hated. "I loved you for 40 years, Harold," I said, and the words didn't hurt as much as I expected. I loved the man who built that first deck with me. I loved the man who stayed up all night when Leo had the croup. That man is still in there somewhere, buried under all that expensive silk and ego. I hope you find him for your sake. Because the man I saw at the Blue Velvet, I don't know him. And I don't want to. He reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of my hand. He was waiting for permission. I didn't give it, but I didn't pull away either. "I'll sign everything," he said. "Every page. I won't fight you on a single dime. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Martha. I just wish I hadn't waited until I lost you to realize it." He stayed for the rest of the day, helping me clear the brush around the cabin and fix the screen door that had been hanging on one hinge for years. We worked in a strange, meditative peace. There was no laughter, but there was no screaming. It was a quiet reconciliation, not a restoration of a marriage, but a restoration of our humanity. We were acknowledging that we were two flawed people who had reached the end of a long, complicated road. As the sun began to set, Harold packed his small bag. He looked at the cabin one last time. "It's a good place, Martha," he said. "Quiet. You can hear yourself think here." "That was always the problem, wasn't it?" I asked gently. He gave a sad, knowing smile. Yeah, it was. I watched his car pull down the gravel drive, the red taillights disappearing into the shadows of the tall pines. I went back inside and sat by the fire. The house in Oak Creek was being sold. The Vance name was no longer a golden ticket in the county. But as I sat there listening to the lake lap against the shore, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt since I was a girl. I had my dignity. I had my truth. And most importantly, I had a future that was entirely my own. The show was over, the audience had gone home, and the lead actress was finally enjoying the silence. The colonial house in Oak Creek sold 3 months later. I didn't attend the closing. I sent my lawyer and stayed at the cabin, watching the ripples on Lake Anna turn from silver to deep indigo as the seasons shifted. Harold moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment near the Veterans Hospital. He sent me a letter once a month, not begging for a second chance, but simply updating me on his progress in counseling and his efforts to slowly repay the private debts he'd accrued. He was working a desk job at a local hardware store, a far cry from the mahogany corner office. But in his last note, he mentioned that he finally slept through the night without a drink. It's funny how we spend our middle years chasing a legacy made of brick mortar and social standing, only to realize in our 60s that the only legacy that matters is the truth we leave behind in the hearts of those who actually know our names. I had spent 42 years being Mrs. Harold Vance, a title that felt like a suit of armor, but was actually just a gilded cage. Standing at the kitchen window of this cabin, drying a mismatched coffee mug, I am finally just Martha. And Martha is more than enough. For those of you listening, perhaps sitting in a house that feels a little too quiet, or looking at a partner who feels like a stranger, I want you to know something. It is never too late to reclaim your life. We are taught that at our age we should just weather the storm for the sake of appearances or the children. We are told that it is what it is, but what it is doesn't have to be a lie. Peace isn't found in the absence of conflict. It's found in the presence of honesty. I learned that revenge is a fire that starts by burning your enemy, but ends by consuming you if you don't know when to walk away. The true show wasn't about ruining Harold. It was about revealing the truth so I could finally stop playing a character in his script. I chose to forgive not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the weight of hating him. Reconciliation doesn't always mean going back to the way things were. Sometimes it means agreeing to walk in different directions with a clear conscience. Take a long look at your own ledgers tonight. Not just the ones at the bank, but the emotional ones. Are you being honest with yourself? Are you protecting the life you spent decades building? Or are you just protecting a facade? Don't be afraid of the silence or the stranger who tells you to stay calm when your world is shaking. Sometimes the most terrifying moments are just the opening act for the most beautiful chapter of your life. If Martha's story touched your heart today, or if you've found your own strength in a season of betrayal, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Share this story with a friend who might be sitting at their own lonely table tonight. We all have a true show inside of us, waiting for the curtain to rise on our authentic selves. Subscribe to, stay with us for more stories of resilience and redemption. And remember, your value isn't tied to a wedding band or a bank account. It's tied to the courage you show when the lights go down. The fire in the hearth is low, now just a warm, steady glow of embers. It's enough to keep the cabin warm through the night. I'm going to sit here a while longer, watching the stars over the lake, grateful for the quiet and the truth.